I came home expecting another ordinary Monday evening. Instead, I walked into a silence so heavy it felt like someone had stolen the air from the house. The dining room was still set from the family dinner we'd hosted only minutes earlier, but my 16-year-old son, Ethan, was nowhere to be seen. The last image burned into my mind wasn't the untouched slice of pie on his plate or the chair he'd quietly pushed back. It was the look on his face after my husband leaned back in his seat, looked directly at him and said, "This conversation doesn't really concern you. You're an outsider, not family." Those words didn't just stop the room. They shattered something inside my son. And 3 days later, the same man who said them would stand in front of me begging for forgiveness. But by then, the damage he'd caused couldn't be undone. The evening had started like dozens before it. Thanksgiving was only a week away, and Greg had invited his parents, his younger brother, and his sister-in-law over for dinner. I spent the entire afternoon cooking while Ethan helped decorate the table, joking about how Grandpa would complain if the mashed potatoes weren't homemade. Watching him laugh, you'd never know he wasn't Greg's biological son. Greg had been in Ethan's life since he was 9 years old. When we got married 7 years earlier, he promised he would never treat Ethan differently. He said love wasn't measured by DNA but by the people who showed up every day. I believed him. More importantly, Ethan believed him. Dinner was comfortable until Greg's father casually mentioned updating the family trust. At first, the conversation sounded harmless. They talked about retirement plans, vacation property, and who would eventually inherit the lake house that had been in Greg's family for generations. I barely paid attention until Greg suddenly cleared his throat and looked across the table toward Ethan. His voice was calm, almost emotionless, which somehow made what he said even worse. "There's really no reason for Ethan to sit through this," he said. "He's not part of this discussion. He's an outsider." For a second, nobody moved. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Ethan blinked as if he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. Greg's mother lowered her eyes to her plate, while his brother quietly reached for his glass of water without saying a word. Nobody challenged him. Nobody defended my son. The silence around that table felt louder than any argument ever could. Ethan slowly placed his napkin beside his plate. His face remained surprisingly calm, but I knew that expression. It was the same look he wore after his biological father walked out of his life 10 years earlier, the look of someone trying desperately not to let anyone see how badly they'd been hurt. Without saying a word, he stood up, whispered, "Excuse me," and walked toward the back door. I started to follow him, but Greg reached over and lightly grabbed my wrist. "Let him go," he said. "He's old enough to hear the truth." I pulled my hand away immediately. "The truth," I repeated, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You just told my son he doesn't belong in this family." Greg sighed as though I was the one overreacting. "Claire, don't make this emotional. I wasn't insulting him. I was stating a fact. He's not biologically related to us." I stared at the man I'd shared my life with for 7 years, searching his face for some sign that this was a cruel joke or a terrible misunderstanding. Instead, all I found was certainty. He actually believed what he'd said. Without another word, I walked outside. I found Ethan sitting alone on the back porch, staring into the darkness beyond the yard. The porch light barely reached him. His elbows rested on his knees, and his hands were clasped so tightly together his knuckles had turned white. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, without looking at me, he asked quietly, "Did he always think that? Or did something change?" That question hurt more than anything Greg had said. I sat beside him and wrapped my arm around his shoulders. "No matter what anyone else says," I whispered, "you are my family. You always will be." He nodded slowly, but he didn't answer. Deep down, I knew words weren't enough anymore. Greg hadn't just insulted Ethan. He'd broken the trust that had taken years to build. And although I didn't realize it yet, that dinner wasn't the beginning of our family's problems. It was only the moment they finally came into the light. Ethan stayed on the back porch for nearly an hour. The November air grew colder with every passing minute, but he never once asked to come inside. He just sat there, elbows resting on his knees, staring into the darkness beyond the fence, as though the answer to what had just happened might somehow be waiting for him out there. Every few minutes, he rubbed his hands together to keep them warm, yet he never looked toward the house. I wanted to go back outside, wrap a blanket around his shoulders, and somehow erase the last 5 minutes from his memory. But I knew some wounds couldn't be fixed that easily. When he finally came inside, he walked straight past Greg without saying a single word. Greg didn't stop him. He didn't apologize. Instead, he continued loading the dishwasher as if the evening had ended with nothing more serious than a disagreement over politics. The sound of plates clinking together echoed through the kitchen while the silence between us became almost unbearable. "I think we need to talk," I finally said. Greg closed the dishwasher door and leaned against the counter. "About what?" For a moment I honestly wondered if he was pretending not to understand, or if he truly believed he'd done nothing wrong. "You humiliated my son in front of your entire family," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. He shrugged. "I didn't humiliate him. I told the truth." "No," I replied quietly. "You revealed what you've been thinking all along." His expression hardened. "Claire, you're making this emotional." "I'm making it emotional?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You looked a 16-year-old boy in the eyes and told him he wasn't family." "I said he wasn't biologically related to us." "You knew exactly what you meant." Greg folded his arms across his chest. "The trust belongs to my family's bloodline. I wasn't going to pretend otherwise." Those words hit harder than the first ones. For 7 years I'd watched him coach Ethan's little league games, help him study for math tests, teach him how to change a flat tire, and proudly introduce him as his son whenever we met new people. Looking back, I realized those moments hadn't necessarily been lies, but maybe they had always come with invisible conditions attached. As long as nothing important was at stake, Greg was willing to play the role of father. The moment money, inheritance, or family legacy entered the conversation, Ethan suddenly became someone else's child. I couldn't stand there another second. Without another word, I walked upstairs. A thin strip of light spilled from beneath Ethan's bedroom door. I knocked softly before opening it. He was sitting at his desk with an open history textbook in front of him, but he wasn't reading. His eyes were fixed on the same page, and I could tell he'd been staring at it for a long time. "You don't have to pretend you're studying," I said gently. A small, tired smile crossed his face. "I wasn't." I pulled a chair beside him and sat down. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "Did he always feel that way?" The question caught me completely off guard. "What do you mean?" He looked down at the desk. Was tonight just the first time he admitted it? Or has he always thought I didn't belong? My chest tightened. Children have an incredible ability to ask the one question adults desperately hope they'll never think of. I reached across the desk and rested my hand on his. "When Greg married me," I said quietly, "I truly believed he accepted both of us." "You believed it?" "Yes. But now you're not sure." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to promise him everything would be okay. Instead, I found myself unable to answer. Sometimes silence tells the truth long before words can. Ethan nodded slowly, almost as if he'd expected my reaction. "I think I'll stay with Grandpa this weekend," he said after a while. "You don't have to leave your own home." "I'm not leaving forever." "Then why go?" He looked toward the window. "I just don't want to spend breakfast wondering if the person sitting across from me wishes I wasn't there." His words broke something inside me. No teenager should ever feel like a guest in the only home he has. That night, long after Ethan had gone to bed, I wandered downstairs hoping a cup of tea might calm my thoughts. The house was completely quiet. Greg had already fallen asleep upstairs after acting as though nothing unusual had happened. As I passed the dining room, something on the table caught my attention. His leather portfolio. Greg never left home without it. Board meetings, business trips, even routine appointments, it was always with him. I picked it up, planning to leave it by the front door before morning. But as I lifted it, I noticed the zipper wasn't fully closed. A stack of papers had slipped halfway out. Normally, I would have pushed them back without another thought. But one line, printed in bold letters near the top of the page, stopped me cold. Beneficiary Amendment Draft. A strange feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. Slowly, almost against my own better judgment, I pulled the papers out just far enough to read the first page. What I saw made my hands go numb. The document wasn't discussing Greg's parents' trust. It was discussing ours. and under the section labeled Children, there was only one entry. Future biological children of Gregory Collins. Ethan's name wasn't crossed out. It wasn't moved to another section. Simply wasn't there at all. I checked the date at the bottom of the page. The document had been prepared nearly 6 months earlier. My heart began pounding. This wasn't something Greg had come up with after our argument at dinner. He had been planning this for months. Just then my phone buzzed. A text from Greg appeared on the screen. Forgot my portfolio. Don't look inside. I'll pick it up tomorrow. I stared at the message, then back at the papers in my hands. For the first time since we'd gotten married, I wasn't wondering how to save our marriage. I was wondering how many more secrets were hidden inside that portfolio, and whether calling my son an outsider had only been the beginning.